Mr. Marchionne, Dan Zarek from WXYZ here in Detroit. Thanks for your time, sir. I noticed with the announcement of the Pacifica today that it's another familiar name to the Chrysler portfolio. Is there any discussion about future product being outside of familiar names like Challenger and Charger? With the exception of the 200, it looks that there's familiar paths of refreshing very familiar names for the company's portfolio.
Yeah, I'm loath to take on new names. It just takes a long time to get them into the sort of collective consciousness. Pacifica is known.
And just a follow-up question, then how does your strategy fit with maintaining your global presence in terms of expanding the vehicle portfolio that you have right now? Are you comfortable with the number of vehicles in your respective divisions, or are you looking to add more?
No. I mean, I made reference to the pickup truck that's coming out of Jeep. I think there's one more on the upper end that needs to be done. You know, we're having some interesting discussions on the inside as to whether we need a smaller vehicle for some jurisdictions for Jeep, a smaller vehicle than the Renegade. And that discussion is not over yet. But I think there's room for expansion where the brands effectively have traction, right, global traction. And Jeep is the classic example of a brand that I think is capable of doing a lot more than it's doing today. But it needs product and it needs extensions.
Brian Traring, 13 ABC Toledo. I want to ask you about the timetable for moving Cherokee from Toledo, as well as any interest you may have in the land offered by the city to FCA. Where does that stand?
Look, the conclusion that we have as of today is that we can actually fully meet our objectives for both Wrangler and the pickup by using the existing installations. It's going to require some downtime for the plant in Toledo to make the conversion. And so I got to make sure that I don't lose the Cherokee in the process, because I can't be out of market with anything. I mean, there are two brands that I cannot be out of market on. One is Jeep, first and foremost, and the other one is Ram. I just can't suspend production of these vehicles. So as I move these things around, I got to make sure that there's a recipient plant that can produce them while the other one winds down. And that's really that's been the difficult part in all this.
Any impact on employment numbers?
By the time we finish, not actually, it might even be up. Ed does not run this fast in years.
Ed Garson, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Mr. Marchionne, sorry I didn't introduce myself before. Peter Langell, CKLW Windsor. You've had some success, or some would say success, spinning off Ferrari from FCA.
I think we have had not some success. We have had success.
Are any thoughts to perhaps spinning off other brands?
No, I'm done.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I've got one up there, and then actually, let me get ask one.
Hi, Jeff Gilbert from WWJ in the back of the room. If you could talk a bit, you made some comments this morning that I saw elsewhere about consolidation, that was essentially, it sounded like you said that was being put on the shelf. Is that where things stand, and are you disappointed that this didn't end up with a partner that you found acceptable to work forward?
Disappointed is a pretty strong word, right? You know, nobody ever approached this topic with the expectation that things would happen instantly. I think it's fair to say that, notwithstanding all the noise in the marketplace and some of the responses that have been sort of enunciated by my colleagues in this business, that nobody has taken issue with the validity of the analysis that was carried out. And so your suggestion that, you know, it's been put on the shelf, it's not, it hasn't gone into storage. It's on the shelf because of the fact that whenever you do these things, you have to trade off the benefit associated with a rather lengthy process of conversion of the other party to your views, as opposed to the execution of your plan to try and get to a zero debt position and $9 billion in profits by 2018. And when you risk adjust it and you look at the attention that the usage of my time and the usage of management time across the Group Executive Council devoted to the conversion process of a potential merge candidate against the benefits associated with achieving the plan, the returns are absolutely lopsided towards making the plan. Having said this, the inevitability of consolidation as a strategy to try and provide a solid platform for this business going forward is undisputed. And I would challenge any CEO, other than a premium automaker, to come into this room and argue otherwise. It's nonsense. And what you see out there, look, I'm old enough to have lived through, I'm not old enough to remember the tulip bubble in Holland in the 1700s. I think it was 1700s. But I'm old enough to remember all the nonsense that went on in the capital markets in connection with the internet. And I remember at the time I've been a CEO for more than 20 years, but I've been a CEO for 3 or 4 years, and I was running a business that had, it was a conglomerate, but it was running a large position in primary metals and conversion. And I remember sitting there with a bunch of barely shaving analysts, I was talking to the males, who looked at me with this bewildered look whenever I answered a question about, what is your internet strategy? And I said, I don't have one, because I was running mines and conversions. And he looked at me like I just landed out of Mars. And we're now living through the same type of hype about connectivity and autonomous driving and everything else, as if all these things are going to come effortlessly and without a cost, without recognizing that the end benefit of all this is going to end up in a standardized solution. Because the great thing about autonomous driving is that it's colorless. You will not be able to recognize a car by the way in which it autonomously drives. It either does it safely or it doesn't do it safely. And we have now this bizarre desire to develop our own solution. And we're in this, we're going to go through this, right? So we're going to go through this incredible buildup of excitement that will reflect itself in the capital markets about the fact that some people are ahead of others on this issue and they're not on the same page. But ultimately, we will all end up there because the supplier base is incredibly prolific, it's proficient, it's efficient. It will provide solutions. It will provide solutions that bridge the gap between people that have and don't have that solution. But we'll all end up in the same place. And in the interim, we will have continued to commit capital separately for a common venture that could have been standardized and commonized in the most cost-efficient way today. And nobody says anything. And so when confronted with this kind of reaction, the only thing you can do as the CEO of a house is to go back into your shorts and say, I'm going to run the hell out of this organization to try and maximize its potential, because the inevitability of that consolidation argument is undisputed and it's looming. It'll happen. And I'm honest enough intellectually to say that if I'm not the guy I'm not going to be here, because I will not do this forever. And I can't. There's a point in which you get tired of all this stuff. But I saw Bob Lutz trying to sell cars again on the thing, and as charming as I find it, I don't even know anything about the car, but if you see me on the stand here at his age, you take me out. I mean, just borrow a cart and mow me down. But this plan, this consolidation story, will be executed by somebody. It'll have to get done because we just don't have enough resources to do all the things that we need to do and survive the event. We just can't. So don't do it today. Wait 3 years, you'll do it later.
There was a land question mentioned earlier. When Toledo and the Ohio delegation was busy buying up millions of dollars in property around the existing Jeep plant, and you guys knew that they were anticipating the need for new plant to expand Wrangler. Were they ever told that keeping Wrangler in Toledo, which they wanted to do very much, would cost them the Cherokee? Some claim to have been blindsided by the Cherokee announcement? Are
No,
they
I don't.
naive, out of touch, or are they not telling
To
the
be,
truth?
to be perfectly honest, look, I think we need to be very careful, because the assumption in buying land, I wasn't privy to the discussions that were had at the time, at least the discussions that I've had with the mayor at the time, and the couple of conversations that I had with the governor, with Kasich. I think it would have been very naive thinking in anybody's mind to think that just owning land next to the plant would have somehow made up for the cost differential in installing capacity above and beyond the current production capacity in Toledo. Because the building of that plant, the recreation of a paint shop and everything else would have put the cost of this installation beyond it would have changed drastically the economics. And I understand the attachment to the Wrangler. I understand it. I understand the historical connection of the Wrangler to Toledo, and I've done everything I can, because, by the way, this thing did not come, this decision to put the Wrangler back into Toledo, the new Wrangler, and effectively take the Cherokee out, is not a costless venture for SCA. It costs us money to move that production. I'm going to be down. I have to retool another plant while we do this. The process is not easy, and it's not cheap. But it's the least cost alternative that I had to effectively keep the Wrangler in Toledo. It's the only thing I could do. I had no other choice. And we were boxed into that notion because of the desire to keep the Wrangler. And once you made that sort of the unequivocal choice as Toledo, and you said you must keep it here, I complied. And I complied in a way that does not tax the state, it does not tax the city. And I'll bear the cost of that transition. But I cannot go out there and make the inordinate economic decision of building additional capacity in Toledo to satisfy both the Cherokee and the Wrangler. Those two things can't coexist, because it would have pushed the cost of this project by over $1.5 billion over what I have today on the table as the alternative. And that's something I couldn't get to it. I didn't, you turn the numbers every which way from Sunday, you just couldn't get there. I didn't know how to do it. None of our people did. And so we did the right thing. We kept the Wrangler in Toledo and swallowed hard and moved it on.
Just going back to the Canadian and the contract negotiations coming up, since you've been here at FCA, can you talk about how the relationship between the corporation and the union has changed, and how you expect those negotiations to play out?
You're talking about the relationship between the Canadian Union or of the U.S. Union?
The Canadian Union, Unifor.
Well, now that we've lost Ken Luenza, we've lost some of the color and the dialogue. But we have had little interface, to be honest, other than some very broad topic discussions with the unions. We have not must be a party outside. We haven't engaged in any type of discussions. I have nothing positive or negative to say about them. I can only tell you that historically, if I go back to the 2009 period, and I made this clear to the government officials at the time from both the province of Ontario and the government of Canada, from the feds, that the Canadian labor force had been the least engaged in contributing to the resolution of the problems facing Chrysler at the time, and that all the concessions that were made in the U.S. This distinction between Tier 1s and Tier 2s was something that was unacceptable to the Canadian environment, and that had a set of consequences in terms of decisions that were made in the last 6.5 years about allocation of product and other decisions that obviously impacted on the size of our commitment to Canada. All these issues are going to be back at the table now, not because of history, because I think history is what it is. And I'm not commenting as to whether it was the right thing to do or not at the time. But the experience has not been forgotten. And so we have a relationship here with the UAW, which I think is stronger than ever because of, I forget about all the fact that Dennis and I have sort of ended up being respectful participants in the resolution of the labor objectives going forward, regardless of how people have colored that relationship, which I think is nonsense. But one of the things that and it may be the right time for me to sort of use you to deliver a message back to our Canadian labor friends. The world has changed, and I think that classical capital labor antagonistic positions are dead. I am more than surprised. I was actually hurt by, I mean, I'll survive the event, but I was hurt by the characterization of the UAW's behavior in this and trying to get a deal done as being too strong in alignment with the corporate side, too akin to our interests as opposed to representing labor. The unfortunate problem is that those comments are coming from people who were not here in 2009. We've doubled our workforce here in the U.S. in the last 6 years. And those comments are coming from people who have attributes of labor militancy and were not at the table, were not here in 2009 when I was losing $1 billion a month. And the sacrifices that were made by all of us involved in that exercise is something that they've forgotten. They've forgotten because they didn't live through it and they never read the papers to find out what it was really like. And so I think we have an obligation to remember that event as we go forward. We have an obligation to remember it daily and to recognize that the simple fact that we're here is a recognition of the tremendous amount of effort that went on across the whole organization, including and especially as a result of the engagement of the blue collars. If we start repitching capital against labor arguments in the next round of negotiations, I have zero interest. I mean, I will just, you have to call somebody else to negotiate the deal because I won't. That's not the way in which this business is going to come out of its mess. It just won't. We came out of this mess once because we collaborated and we have faith in each other to try and move the organization forward. If that paradigm shifts, if it changes, if the dialogue is a different type of dialogue, I have no interest. I'm not here to take away from labor. That's not my objective. It has never been in the last 6 years, and it isn't today. But we need to find a way in which we can balance the interest of capital providers and provide the interest of labor. That's a different task. And if you go back to the question you asked earlier about consolidation, the objective of consolidation was to try and bring down the cost of execution on the capital side so there could be an effective wealth redistribution mechanism in place. There's no, my biggest bone of contention with Ron Gettelfinger back in 2009 when I was negotiating with Treasury was not about anything else, but it was about the distribution of wealth. And I reminded him, I said, there's no wealth to be distributed here. We're broke. And he didn't like it. He didn't like the fact that I reminded him that we were bust. But we were bust. We're not bust now, but it doesn't mean that the problem is over, right? This thing is cycle dependent. It's incredibly competitive. We need to be continuously aware of the threat to our own existence. And that can only happen if there is an incredibly strong connection between labor and management to make sure that we get to the right answer. But it has to be done daily. It has to be done in a very constructive way. It has to be done by embracing the notion of world-class manufacturing. It has to be done by all the things that are required to make this house competitive. It's not a competition for $2. $2 will buy you, I don't even know what a burger costs. I think it costs a lot more than, McDonald's prices must be lower, but if it costs you $10 to buy a burger, $2 gets you a piece of it, right? But you're going to survive Tuesday. The question is whether you're going to be here in 5 years. And that's the biggest challenge that we face as automakers. All that stuff out there, you guys fall in love with this whole notion of car sharing, about the fact that people will not buy cars and everything. Have you ever thought about what the impact of that notion is on installed manufacturing capacity in the U.S.? Just think about it for a moment. People stop buying cars because they now, everybody Ubers their way to everything, or lifts into heavens, or does whatever the hell they do. What happens to the installed capacity in the US? If that's true. So, yeah, let's get really realistic about what we need to get done here. And it's important as we negotiate the next round with the Canadians to keep that in mind. Was I helpful in that answer? Or now that you provoked me.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you very much.